Hey, it's Jared with State of Tech. Today we're going to talk about the Synology NAS. This is a long-term review as I've been a Synology user for a very long time, and this is not my first Synology device. I've made previous videos on Synology NAS for different reasons, but today in 2022, why would you want to use a device like this when you can use cloud storage like Dropbox, Google Drive, all of those? And so we're not only going to review the device, but we're going to talk about why you would want to consider localized storage or self-hosting over using a cloud-based service. So let's get started with the main reasons why. Well, cloud-based storage is increasingly going to be expensive over time. You're either going to need more storage and you're going to have to pay more, or they'll raise their prices and change those things over time. A lot of cloud storage starts off as free. Maybe you get a couple of gigabytes or terabytes available with an email account or a new service or something like that. But eventually you end up needing more storage. Either you run out of space or they decide that they're not going to offer it for free anymore, as Google did with Google Photos. Now, when Google made that decision, I made a video on utilizing Synology and Synology Photos. And so if you're more interested in specifically what it looks like to use a NAS as your photo and video backup device, I've got a video for that. You can check out the link in the description below. I also have a link in the description below to my NAS and its configuration so you can see how I set mine up, and I may do a video that's more in-depth on that setup if you're interested. So the Synology is a fixed cost. You buy it up front, and really the only thing that you need is to have it plugged into electricity and an internet connection in order for it to work so that you can utilize it when you're outside of the home or the office. It doesn't even need an internet connection, really. It does just need to be connected to your local area network so that you can back up your phone and other devices and stuff to it. So with cloud storage, you'll eventually run out of space. It's going to cost you every single month. A Synology device is maybe a bigger upfront cost, and then you don't have to really have any additional fees until it's time to replace something like a hard drive. Things wear out over time, of course. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we get through this video. A big thing is more control over your data, and I hear it from a lot of people. They're increasingly concerned with how their data is being used by these different services. Google obviously offered us Google Photos for free so that it could get a ton of data and learn about our photos, our video, our behaviors in photography, the things we take pictures of. It really trained its AI on facial recognition and everything, utilizing our data that we hand-fed Google for free. So Google learned a lot from our data. And if you read the fine print on all of these different providers that provide cloud storage, they are utilizing our stuff to learn somehow. They are not just providing us free or close to free access to storage. They are learning utilizing our data. So if you want more control over your data, you don't want cloud AI or algorithms utilizing your data, then local storage is really the only option. On a Synology NAS, it does have AI features and stuff like that, but it is self-hosted locally on your box. It's not phoning home and sending off that information. They are developing their software themselves, and then that software gets pushed to your NAS, and then it's utilized there on your NAS, which is why it has a processor and memory and stuff like that. It is technically a server that is a storage server, and so it's much smarter than just an external hard drive or a series of external hard drives. So all of that stuff happens locally on the box, which means you still get some of the cool features that are out there, which I walk through, especially in that Synology Photos video that you should definitely check out after watching this one. But there's lots of other features that Synology NASs have as well, like being able to run an email or web hosting server, being able to connect security cameras to it. I mean, there are so many different things that a Synology NAS can do. So the benefits, of course, are true file ownership. You own your files because they're on your drives locally here, and they're not being utilized for other things. Nothing's really stopping cloud providers even from locking you out of your data. Should they decide to cancel your account or something like that, you could be totally locked out of your data with the exception of whatever files you might have saved locally. And that's kind of a scary thing, especially considering the world that we're living in these days. A company being able to just lock you out of your data and you lose everything, that would be pretty crazy. And we don't really hear too much about that stuff happening, but if you go look online, you can hear stories of people losing access to their accounts. It is happening. So local means faster transfer rates most of the time. Having all of my data here locally, where I live in Montana, is much faster than having it connected to the internet. Now, before moving to Montana, I had faster internet, and I was able to access my files pretty quickly, but it was still much slower having to download access to files, have them locally, re-upload them back, or utilize some sort of a syncing technology for that to work. It was kind of a pain. And I can do all of that locally here, which means faster access to my files. I can literally edit video from my Synology NAS rather than having to have everything stored locally. That's not something that I can do when I'm connected to Dropbox or some other cloud-based tool like that. Cloud storage for everyone in your household or your business as well. So where with most of these tools like Dropbox, Google Drive, you have to pay for additional users and licenses, especially if you're in a business environment. On a Synology NAS, you can add as many user accounts as you want, give people shared access to certain folders or libraries, and have specific storage just for those users. They all have a home folder, just like a personal Dropbox or something like that, for storing their own local files, and then there's also shared access to different files and directories as well. You may have other things that you want to self-host as well, like perhaps bringing your email internal and self-hosting it on a Synology. You could even use it as a web server and host your website. Of course, you got to have good internet for that, but there are lots of things that you can use the Synology server for that will offset other costs. I know for me, I have web hosting, I've got email, I've got cloud storage. All of those things cost money and could be brought down and just done locally inside of my NAS. Just have to have an internet connection for that. So what are some of the disadvantages that a Synology NAS would have, or really any NAS, not just Synology? Well, the main thing is the internet limitations. If you are hosting your email, your files, and everything on a Synology NAS with a standard internet service, if that internet goes down, you lose access to everything. Companies like Dropbox, OneDrive, Google Drive, they all have infrastructure that's going to stay up and running pretty much most of the time. Of course, there's been some issues this year with Amazon Web Services taking out different services for a period of time. But if you have your Synology NAS and you're using it, you're going to have good internet, or at least be okay should that internet go out without having access to your files for a specific amount of time until it comes back up. So good internet, not a problem. Spotty internet, probably more of an issue, and you might want to use it only for local file storage instead of utilizing it for something like an email server. The initial setup costs can be kind of expensive as well, depending on what you're needing. You can spend a couple $100s, you could spend several $1,000s on a Synology NAS, depending on how much storage and how much performance you want out of that NAS. A simple, like 2-drive bay NAS is probably going to cost you under $500 to get set up, which isn't going to take a whole lot of time to recover in the costs that you would spend on like cloud storage and stuff like that, but you're also going to be limited to the amount of expandability that has. You're going to have to keep putting bigger drives in it as bigger drives become available. And bigger drives we're not getting these big leaps and bounds in drive storage capabilities or capacities these days like we used to. So initial setup costs could be a bit, because you have to think out into the future a little bit. Think about how much storage space you may need and make sure you get a Synology that has enough drive bays available, and then buy enough drives to fit your needs in that period of time. Maintenance costs are also another consideration. If you put NAS drives in there, which are a little more expensive than just standard drives that you'd buy at like Best Buy or something, off-the-shelf drives, they're going to cost a little bit more money, but they're going to run nonstop for years on end. NAS drives are designed to be used and abused in an environment like file storage, and those drives are going to last 5 years or so without any problems, and the Synology NAS does a really good job of letting you know when a drive is is potentially going to have issues so that you can pull it out and put in a new drive in its place. So maintenance costs, there are going to be some of those, but they're not really that bad. The NAS is designed to last a long time, and the drives also. Having everything localized also means having a need to back up what you have. Of course, everything being stored on one device is only as safe and secure as that one device is. Should you have a fire or a flood or some sort of an issue, a theft, whatever, some crazy power surge that comes in and just destroys everything, there goes all your data. And that wouldn't happen necessarily if you were in a cloud-based storage scenario. So you still need to consider some sort of offsite backup. For me personally, I use a backup solution that doesn't really think at all about the data that I'm backing up, and that's the Amazon AWS Glacier. It backs that up periodically. It's backing up files. It's meant for long-term file storage, which means it's pretty inexpensive. I'm paying like around $25, $30 a month for it, and I have an off-site backup of all of my data. Should my Synology just totally die on me, I just need to get enough storage and I can download all of that stuff and have it back again. So I'm still using cloud storage, which may sound kind of like defeats the purpose of this whole video, but I'm not using cloud storage in the more traditional sense where I'm utilizing their different AI services and tools because I'm putting that sort of content into them. I'm simply using it as an offsite backup. And that's not the only way that you can do it. You can also have a second Synology NAS somewhere else and you can offsite backup to that, which doubles the cost essentially. But that's another way of backing things up. So your data is only as secure as your backup environment is. So, we talked about the benefits, we talked about the disadvantages. Let's talk about the specific NAS that I use, which is the DS1621XS Plus. Sounds like a Samsung phone. The name is so long, but it is a really good NAS. It has good expandability. It's not the biggest one that they make. It's definitely not the smallest one that they make. But for me, I wanted good performance because read and write speeds to the NAS were important to me because I was going to be editing video from it and having other people accessing the NAS as well. And so I wanted the expandability of being able to get quite a bit of storage in there because knowing me, I will fill it up. And I also wanted fast access to it. And this particular NAS had all of the specs. I filled it with Western Digital NAS series drives. And so each drive in it is a 10 terabyte drive. And I have 6 drives in there, which gives me 60 terabytes total. But because I am running the Synology RAID that they recommend, I can pull out any drive at any time and the entire NAS will work fine without any data loss, which means if one drive just decides it's gonna die and it just won't even turn on, that drive is just toast. I can pull that drive out, put another drive in there, and all of my data will still be intact. And so that's important to me to have at least one drive fault tolerance so that I could pull that drive out, replace it, and that means that my data is safe. And if I have one drive go bad, I'm not going to lose access to all of the data because your data is spread across all of those drives. That is what a RAID environment means, is taking a bunch of individual drives and making them work together to provide a lot of storage space. So I'm using Western Digital drives. I also have NVMe SSD cache drives in there as well. The way that the Synology works is it will put some data in cache so that it's faster access, because think about spinning drives. We don't put spinning hard drives in laptops and stuff anymore because they're slow. And so spinning drives in a NAS also would be a bit slower. And so it utilizes solid state drives as a cache drive to load data and stuff into for faster access. And so I wanted there to be a lot of space for that. And so I went ahead and put in dual 1 terabyte NVMe drives. 1 terabyte NVMe drives are not that expensive, and so I put them in there so that I have as fast access to my data as possible. And then I make sure that I use Cat6 Ethernet cables so that I have the fastest transfer rates that I possibly can between my NAS and the devices that I have connected. Some of my devices are connecting to the NAS via Wi-Fi. Some of them are connecting to the NAS via Cat6 cable through my local area network. And so that means fast access to everything. And I already talked about the RAID security configuration, giving me the ability to pull out any drive at any time, one single drive, of course, and replace that should there be problems. So what are the top 5 features that I use on a Synology NAS? Well, file storage is the number one for me. File storage is important because I film a lot of videos like this. This project in and of itself will be gigabytes in size, probably around 10 to 15 gigabytes in size. And so when you have a lot of projects that size, that's going to add up quickly. And then if I've got my phone backing up, everybody's phone is backing up, and devices, things that are backing up, that NAS is going to fill up quick. And so even just in the short period of a year, we've managed to get 15 terabytes on that NAS. And a couple times a year, I will go in and clean up and delete some older files that I don't need anymore, which will bring it back down. But it's easy to fill one of these devices up. So for me, I use it for file storage so I can have local access to those big files. Imagine uploading 15 gigabytes of a project up to the cloud and then needing access to it just to make one little change. I'd have to download the entire thing. It'd probably take me all day. And then by the time that I was able to work on it and then get it backed up again, how much time would I have lost? And so having all of my storage local is a much better experience for me and for the access of that data. So Synology Drive, which is the interface that I use in connecting my computer to the NAS, works just like Google Drive or Dropbox, where I can sync data and view everything right in the Finder on my Mac or right in Explorer on Windows and see access to all of my files and only sync locally what I need to sync locally. Any items that I don't need access to, I just want to see and know that they're there, I can set those as online only and I can see them, and then they're just not synced. And then if I want to sync them, the process of downloading them from the NAS to my computer is way faster than downloading them over the internet. So Synology Drive is great. Synology Photos, which runs on my phone and then also on the NAS, and so my phone backs up its photos and videos to Synology NAS, where Synology Photos is accessible, and I can see all of my photos, sort them, and do all of the things that I could have done in Google Photos, just doing them localized instead. I also back up my Mac. As my Mac is a laptop and I travel with it, I want to make sure that I have a backup. And so when my laptop is here, using Time Machine backup rather than having a hard drive or a solid state drive plugged into my laptop, I could back up directly to a specific drive that I've allocated on the Synology NAS. And by that, I don't mean one of the drives that's within the NAS. I mean, I can set up a specific section of the storage of the NAS just for backing up my computers, because if you've ever plugged in a drive into your Mac and tried to set it as a Time Machine backup drive, it forces you to use the entire drive as a backup, and that's not going to work. If you're utilizing your whole Synology as a Time Machine backup, you're not going to be able to utilize it for anything else. So you can actually set up a specific like partition almost on the NAS, and then that can be something that you can back up to. At one point in the past, I had like 8 Macs backing up to it. It was great. It meant that every Mac was backed up to the NAS, and if I needed access to restore from that backup, it was all there and easily accessible. So I back up my Mac to my Synology as well. And then Cloud Sync is something that I use. I still use Dropbox because Dropbox makes it easier for me to share files with other people. Of course, I can do that with Synology, but because of the internet connections that I have here in Montana, utilizing that to share files with other people is going to be a slow experience for those other people. And so for me, I still use Dropbox, and that means using the Cloud Sync app on the Synology so that I could sync some of the things on my Synology NAS with Dropbox and make sure that those files are accessible. So I still need Dropbox, and I've talked about cloud and everything here and how I'm trying to get away from it, but I utilize cloud for some of those features where I have to interface with other people. I only need a small amount of cloud storage space with Dropbox because I'm storing most of my stuff here. So some tips on a Synology NAS if you're thinking about it. Buy with the future in mind. Like I talked about before, if you bought a 2-bay Synology NAS, you're going to be able to get maybe 24 terabytes or so in there. I mean, device storage, drive storage is getting larger and larger. But if you want one drive fault tolerance, with only 2 drives in there, you're only going to get the effective storage space of 1 drive. So if you buy 2 10 terabyte drives and put them in there, you're only going to get about 10 terabytes of space because one of those drives has to be fault tolerant, and so that only leaves you 1 drive left. So if you get a Synology NAS that has, say, at least 4 bays, then that means you can have around 30 terabytes of storage space while still having 1 drive fault tolerance. Or you don't even have to fill the entire thing with drives. You could put 2 drives in there, and then as you fill those up, you can add another drive. It is as simple as sliding in a new drive and turning your NAS back on and telling it to add that drive to the storage pool that you already have, and it will intelligently go and add that drive in and then reconfigure your data so it's utilizing all 3 or all 4 or all 5 of those drives now, which is awesome. That means you can buy a bigger NAS than you really need, but you don't have to fill it up with hard drives quite yet. And the hard drives are where it gets kind of expensive. So of course I highly recommend using Synology's configurable RAID, and that RAID series is going to give you 1 drive fault tolerance, which means you do, as I said, need to think about how many drives you're going to put in there so that you make sure that you have the amount of space that you want and still having the effectiveness of having that 1 drive fault tolerant in the RAID configuration. If you want an offsite backup and you don't want to have to buy a second Synology and put it elsewhere, of course, AWS, Amazon Web Services, Glacier, backup is an alternative there, and it's a slow process of running everything to that backup because it's doing it off-site. And of course, the more you access that data, the more expensive it gets. But the idea that you're just backing up to that service and only having to access it in case of an emergency if your NAS has a problem, it keeps the cost down. Like I said before, I'm spending about $25 to $30 a month, and that's good insurance for me knowing that I have a total backup of all of my data and that my data is being stored in a service where they're not using it for AI purposes, at least yet. In the future, I may actually decide, let's put a Synology NAS somewhere else, maybe at my in-laws' house or something like that, where I can connect it there. It sits in the closet. My NAS backs up to that NAS, and then I have offsite backup. That's another alternative that I may look at. I also recommend using a external power backup solution, like one of the ones that you can get for under your desk. Now, unless you get a large one, it's not going to run your Synology NAS for a long period of time. I will link to the one that I use below, and when the power goes out, my Synology NAS will run for about 20 minutes before it runs out of battery power, and that gives me enough time to come in and shut down the Synology NAS myself in most circumstances. Obviously, if I'm not here, I'm going to run out of time. But I also have my internet and everything else connected to it as well. So if the power goes out in my office or to my home office where my NAS is, then I get a notification because the power went out, because I've got some smart plugs here, and those phone home and tell me when my power goes out. And then as long as the internet is still up, I can get into my NAS and I can shut it down even remotely when I'm not here. And that makes sure that my NAS shuts down nicely and doesn't have any issues there. Of course, I've had a Synology NAS many times shut off just because it ran out of power, because the power went out, or the power supply ran out of battery power, and it was fine. It didn't kill anything. It didn't hurt anything there. So, closing thoughts, Synology continues to add features to make their NAS pretty amazing. They're the best options that are out there as far as something that comes pretty much ready to go. You can, of course, build your own NAS, install all sorts of software, and do it yourself, which is a great option as well. But using Synology means having software updates and everything just working when you need it to work. I have never had any issues with my Synology NAS units over the years, and this is my 4th or 5th one, I believe. And the only reason that I have gotten different ones is because I've upgraded in size and capacity and features. And so it's great. It's a great alternative to the what's now, I guess, considered traditional storage, which would be cloud storage. We're going backwards in a different direction, thinking about hosting our stuff locally. But I think it's a great alternative. It's a great solution to those of us that are worried about what's being done with our data and having access to our data. So look at the links in the description below to the full setup that I have built out for my NAS, and I may produce another video later more in detail on how I do specific things with my NAS, or even how I built and configured it in the first place. So if that's interesting to you, definitely let me know. Give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel here on State of Tech, and I hope to see you back in another one soon. Take care.